At a Walmart near Fort Bragg, 19-year-old cashier Ryan Keller notices a struggling young mother, Sergeant Caitlyn Walsh, unable to pay for her sick son's essentials. Despite an impatient customer's scorn, Ryan quietly covers the cost, sparking controversy when footage leaks online. Critics call him naive, but the truth emerges. Caitlyn, a decorated soldier, faced vulnerability after her husband's death. Her gratitude and a military commendation transform Ryan's small act into a symbol of dignity. As debates rage, a question lingers. What deeper impact will this gesture have on their lives and community? Love stories of everyday heroes? Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales like Ryan's. Support our channel by liking, sharing, and joining our community. Your support helps us uncover stories of courage and kindness that matter. Hit that subscribe button now and stay connected. Thank you. The harsh words cut through the air like a cold wind in the bustling Walmart, a cavernous store just 3 miles from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. If you can't afford it, don't shop here. We're not a charity. The voice, dripping with disdain, came from a middle-aged woman with a cart overflowing with groceries, her impatience palpable. At register 7, a young mother stood frozen, her head bowed in quiet shame. Her toddler, nestled against her shoulder, gripped her collar tightly, his small body warm and heavy in her arms. The cashier, a lanky 19-year-old named Ryan Keller, paused mid-scan, his fingers hovering over the register. His heart sank as he watched the scene unfold, but he quickly reset the price and reached for his own wallet. Unseen by most, security cameras recorded every moment of the quiet act that would soon ripple far beyond the store's fluorescent-lit aisles. What made this simple gesture resonate so deeply? Who was this young woman, and why did Ryan's small act of kindness become a symbol of something greater? Ryan's shift had started like any other Tuesday afternoon, slow, predictable, and filled with the hum of routine. A college freshman with perpetually tousled brown hair, he had mastered the art of scanning barcodes while mentally juggling his economics homework. The Walmart, a hub for military families, locals, and the occasional tourist, was a familiar rhythm to him. 6 months into his part-time job, every dollar he earned went toward next year's tuition, supplementing the scholarship that kept his dreams of a degree within reach. The work was monotonous, but Ryan found comfort in its predictability. He liked the steady flow of customers, the small talk, the fleeting connections. It grounded him, a counterbalance to the abstract theories of his textbooks. But then she appeared, a young woman, no older than her mid-20s, her face etched with exhaustion. Her eyes, shadowed with sleepless nights, carried a quiet resilience. She moved with purpose, her steps deliberate despite the weight of the sleeping toddler balanced on her hip. Her clothes, though clean, bore the faint wear of overuse, the kind of subtle fraying that spoke of careful maintenance. She placed 3 items on the conveyor belt with a tenderness that suggested each was a calculated necessity. A box of children's milk, a small package of diapers, and a bottle of pediatric cough medicine. The toddler, his small face pressed against her shoulder, stirred slightly but remained asleep, his tiny hand clutching her shirt as if she were his anchor in a storm. "Hey there," Ryan said, his voice warm as he scanned the items. He glanced at the boy, his cheeks flushed with the remnants of a fever. "Is he feeling better?" His question was gentle, an attempt to ease the tension he sensed in her posture. "Getting there," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a cold, but he's been struggling to sleep." Her words were measured, as if she were rationing her energy, saving it for the child in her arms. The register beeped, displaying a total of $24,087. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small stack of crumpled bills. Her fingers moved slowly, counting each one with a focus that betrayed her growing anxiety. Ryan watched her lips move silently, her mental math faltering as she realized she was short by about $8. Her face fell, a fleeting moment of defeat crossing her features. Her shoulders slumped and her eyes darted to the items, as if deciding which lifeline to abandon. Before she could speak, a heavy sigh erupted from the line behind her. The middle-aged woman, her cart brimming with groceries, didn't bother to lower her voice. "If you can't afford it, don't hold up the line," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to slice through the hum of the store. The young mother's cheeks flushed a deep red, her embarrassment a tangible weight. The toddler, sensing the shift in his mother's mood, stirred and began to whimper, his small cries piercing the air. The woman's hand instinctively moved to soothe him, stroking his back as she whispered, "It's okay, baby." But her voice trembled, betraying the turmoil beneath her calm exterior. She felt the eyes of the line on her, each glance a judgment, each second an eternity. Ryan's chest tightened. He'd seen struggling customers before, parents stretching dollars, soldiers counting change. But this felt different. The woman's quiet dignity, the way she held her son so protectively, stirred something in him. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, "you can leave one item if you'd like, or, He hesitated, then lowered his voice further, almost to a whisper. "I can cover the difference." His offer was impulsive but certain, born from a place he couldn't quite name. Her eyes met his, wide with his surprise and a flicker of pride. "No, that's very kind, but I can't accept," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. She straightened as if reclaiming her resolve, but Ryan had already decided. Without drawing attention, he swiped his debit card through the employee terminal, covering the entire $24.87. It was a small fortune for him, lunch money for the rest of the week, maybe more, but the cost felt trivial compared to the weight of her embarrassment. He handed her the receipt with a small nod, his expression neutral but his heart racing. The act was quiet, almost invisible, but to him it felt like a stand against the cruelty of the moment. The woman behind them wasn't done. "Are you using your own money?" she shouted, her voice thick with indignation. "This isn't a relief station. Management should know you're playing favorites." Her words were a public accusation, each syllable designed to wound. The young mother's face crumpled further. She grabbed her bag of purchases, her movements hurried, almost frantic, as her son's cries grew louder. Clutching the bag and her child, she moved toward the exit, her steps quickening as if she could outrun the shame. Melissa, the cashier at the next register, leaned over, her voice a hushed warning. "You shouldn't have done that, Ryan. That's Mrs. Peterson. She's tight with regional management. She'll make trouble." Ryan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Next customer, please," he called, his voice steady, but his mind replaying the scene. Some battles weren't worth fighting, he thought, but some people were worth defending, even if they didn't ask for it. The young mother's quiet strength, the way she'd shielded her son from the world's harshness, lingered in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. By the end of his shift, Ryan had nearly pushed the incident to the back of his mind. Nearly. As he clocked out, the store manager, Dave Simmons, appeared by the time clock, his face a mask of neutrality. "Keller, my office, please," he said, his tone giving nothing away. Ryan followed him through the employee break room to the cluttered office at the back of the store, a small space filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of coffee. A complaint form glowed on Simmons's computer screen, its stark text a salient accusation. "Mrs. Peterson says you were rude to her and showed preferential treatment to another customer," Simmons said, rubbing his forehead with a sigh. "She's demanding disciplinary action." Ryan stood tall, his voice calm but firm. "I wasn't rude, sir. I just helped someone who needed it." His words were simple, but behind them lay a conviction he hadn't fully realized until that moment. He thought of the young mother, her tired eyes and the weight of her son in her arms. He thought of the crumpled bills, the toddler's whimpers, the sting of Mrs. Peterson's words. He didn't regret his choice, even if it meant trouble. Some moments he knew were worth more than a paycheck. Ryan stood behind the register, the weight of his dwindling paycheck heavy in his mind. Money was tight, too tight for impulsive decisions. Yet, when the young mother in front of him fumbled through her wallet, her face flushed with quiet desperation, he couldn't look away. Her hands trembled slightly as she counted out crumpled bills, coming up short for the medicine clutched tightly in her other hand. Her child, pale and listless, clung to her leg. Ryan's heart twisted. He knew the rules, the rigid protocols drilled into every cashier, but the sight of her, exhausted on the verge of breaking, stirred something deep within him. Without a second thought, he reached into his own pocket, swiped his card, and covered the difference. Her eyes widened, a mix of gratitude and embarrassment flickering across her face as she murmured a quiet, "Thank you," before hurrying away. Later, in the sterile break room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee, Simmons, the store manager, fixed Ryan with a stern look. Ryan, we have protocols for declined transactions, he said, his voice clipped, his frown deepening as he leaned back in his chair. You can't make emotional decisions at the register. It's not your place to play hero. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He wanted to explain. The way the woman's voice had cracked when she mentioned her sick child, the way her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight, but the words caught in his throat. She needed medicine, sir, he managed, his tone soft but steady. Simmons sighed, his fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard as he entered notes into the system. I understand you meant well, Ryan, but this is a business. Your actions create liability issues. We're placing a note in your file. No more personal payments for customers. Understood? Ryan nodded, his chest tight with a mix of regret and defiance. He knew arguing would only dig a deeper hole, so he stood, muttered a quiet, "Yes, sir," and left the office. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A group text from his fellow cashiers lit up the screen. Walmart's Robin Hood strikes again. Better watch your back, hero boy. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they twisted his quiet act of kindness into something performative, something to be mocked. By evening, the situation spiraled further. Someone had posted grainy security footage to a local Facebook group, capturing Ryan's discreet transaction with the young mother. The video didn't show her face clearly, just a blurry figure clutching a bottle of medicine. But Ryan's actions were unmistakable. The caption read, "Modern-day hero or naive fool. Cashier pays for mysterious woman's purchases. Rush Walmart rescue team." The comment section exploded with opinions, each one slicing into Ryan's resolve like a paper cut. He's being played by professional beggars. They target young guys like him, one user wrote, their words dripping with cynicism. Another countered, "She was embarrassed, not faking it. Leave the kid alone, at least someone has a conscience." The debate raged on. If he wants to waste his money, that's his business. Never spend your money on people who don't work hard enough to have their own. Ryan scrolled through the comments, his frustration building like a slow burn. He hadn't done it for attention or praise. He hadn't expected criticism either. All he'd seen was a person in need, a fleeting moment where he could help. Closing the app, he shoved his phone into his pocket, the weight of being misunderstood settling heavily on his shoulders. The next morning, Ryan clocked in for his shift, the fluorescent lights of the store buzzing overhead. His co-workers' reactions were a mixed bag. Some flashed him thumbs up, their smiles genuine but fleeting, while others rolled their eyes with exaggerated flair, as if his actions were some grand, foolish gesture. Melissa, a fellow cashier with a knack for gossip, sidled up to him. "You're trending on Fayetteville Community Watch," she said, her voice a mix of amusement and warning. "Better check your locker before you start. Someone left something." Curiosity tinged with unease, Ryan made his way to the employee locker room. Inside his locker, tucked between his folded apron and a spare water bottle, was a small, unmarked envelope. His fingers hesitated before opening it, revealing a military identification card. U.S. Army, active duty, Sergeant First Class K. Walsh. A handwritten note accompanied it, the words penned in careful, deliberate strokes. "Thank you for standing up when I couldn't. I'm a soldier, but that day I was just a struggling single mother." Ryan stared at the ID, his mind racing as fragments of the encounter clicked into place. The woman's efficient movements, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite her distress, the initial refusal to accept his help, it all made sense now. She wasn't just a customer in need. She was someone who had served, who carried the weight of duty and pride, yet found herself in a moment of vulnerability. The note felt like a private confession, a glimpse into a life far more complex than a simple transaction. Ryan slipped the card and note into his pocket, a quiet resolve settling over him. His small act, so trivial in the grand scheme, had mattered to her. It wasn't about the money, it was about seeing her, acknowledging her struggle in a way that preserved her dignity. When he shared the note with Melissa during a quiet moment at the registers, her eyes widened. "You should tell management," she whispered, her voice urgent. "This changes everything." Ryan shook his head, his expression firm. She didn't leave this for publicity, it was just between us. But as the social media storm grew, the narrative around the Walmart hero Cashier became a battleground of opinions. Half the commenters branded him naive, accusing him of seeking attention or falling for a scam. The other half hailed him as a beacon of kindness in a world grown cold. Neither version felt true. To Ryan, it wasn't heroism or foolishness. It was just a moment of human connection, an ordinary act that shouldn't have been remarkable at all. Yet the world seemed determined to make it something more, something to be dissected and judged. He wondered if staying silent was the right choice, or if speaking up might honor the woman's story in a way she hadn't asked for but perhaps deserved. 2 days later, the store's atmosphere shifted subtly during Ryan's afternoon shift. Managers huddled near the customer service desk, their glances darting toward him with an intensity that made his stomach churn. During his break, Simmons approached, his usual stern demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. "Ryan, did you help a military service member recently? A woman with a child?" he asked, his voice low. Ryan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I can't discuss customers, sir. You said that yourself." Simmons handed him a printed email, his expression unreadable. "The Department of Defense contacted corporate this morning. They want to recognize an associate at this location for, and I quote, exemplary civilian support of military personnel in a time of need." Ryan skimmed the email, his heart pounding as the words sank in. The recognition was unexpected, overwhelming, but it also felt like a validation of the quiet choice he'd made. Not for praise, but because it was right. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's story, her private struggle, deserved to remain hers, not a headline or a corporate pat on the back. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the Walmart parking lot, where Ryan stood at his register, his blue vest creased from a night spent tossing and turning. A quiet unease had taken root in his chest, replaying the previous day's encounter with the young mother whose card had been declined. His manager, Simmons, leaned against a nearby counter, muttering under his breath, "This has to be some kind of stunt. Military bigwigs don't show up at a discount store over a $25 purchase." Ryan's throat felt dry, but he managed a soft response. "It wasn't about the money, sir." Simmons raised an eyebrow, his skepticism plain. "Then what was it about, kid?" Ryan's mind raced, searching for words to capture something he was still trying to understand himself. After a pause, he whispered, "Dignity." At precisely 9:00 a.m., the low growl of a military Humvee cut through the morning stillness, followed by 2 Army vehicles pulling into the lot. Shoppers froze, their carts forgotten, while employees drifted toward the windows, phones already out to record the unfolding scene. Through the store's glass doors marched a female officer in a crisp dress uniform, her presence both commanding and composed. 3 servicemen followed, their steps synchronized, boots clicking against the tiled floor. Behind them came a figure Ryan recognized instantly, though she looked entirely different. The young mother from his register was now Sergeant First Class Caitlyn Walsh, her formal uniform adorned with ribbons, the Purple Heart gleaming among them. Her son, dressed in a tiny replica of her uniform, held her hand tightly. His eyes, once shadowed by fear, now danced with curiosity as he took in the crowded store. The usual buzz of the Walmart fell silent as the group approached the customer service desk, where the store's managers stood in an anxious cluster. Ryan stayed at his register, feeling out of place in his vest, his fingers nervously twisting a strip of receipt paper. Sergeant Walsh stepped forward, her posture radiating strength, though a flicker of vulnerability lingered in her eyes. Her voice, steady yet laced with emotion, filled the quiet store. "I've faced enemy fire in Afghanistan. I've led evacuations of villages under siege. But last week I was just a mother who couldn't afford medicine for my son." The words landed like stones in still water, and Ryan felt them ripple through his chest. She continued, her gaze unwavering. 3 months ago, my husband was killed in action overseas. I'm on temporary leave to settle his affairs and care for our son, who's been struggling with recurring respiratory infections since I returned. Her eyes met Ryan's, and he felt the full weight of her story settle over him. When my card was declined at your register, it wasn't just about the money. It was the final blow in a month that had already taken everything I cherished. I'm a combat medic, trained to save lives in the chaos of war, yet I stood here helpless to care for my own child. Her voice cracked slightly, and Ryan saw the grief she carried, a loss no metal could mend. The crowd stood motionless, phones still recording, but the air was thick with shared humanity. Colonel James Barrett, the officer beside her, stepped forward, his voice warm yet authoritative. What this young man did yesterday wasn't just about paying for a few items. He restored dignity to a soldier at her lowest moment. Without knowing her rank, her sacrifices, or her story, without seeking praise or reward, he acted with compassion. He presented a formal letter of commendation from Sergeant Walsh's unit, alongside a civilian service medal, a rare honor for a non-military individual. The Army recognizes those who embody the values we strive to uphold, he said. Courage isn't always found in the heat of battle. Sometimes it's in the quiet acts of kindness performed when no one's watching. A murmur spread through the crowd as Sergeant Walsh saluted Ryan. He returned the gesture awkwardly, his face flushed under the weight of countless eyes. By evening, the store's security footage, now paired with images of the ceremony and Sergeant Walsh in her decorated uniform, had exploded across social media. The video amassed over 12 million views in just 48 hours. Comment sections, once a war zone of criticism, transformed into a space of reconciliation. I judged him too quickly. I'm sorry for my words. This is the America I want to see. People helping each other without prejudice. Mrs. Peterson, whose complaint had fueled the initial outrage, quietly deleted her social media accounts after thousands of comments overwhelmed her posts. Days later, Ryan received an anonymous message that stopped him cold. I'm the one who filmed and posted the original clip of you. I thought I was exposing some naive kid. I was completely wrong. I'm sorry. The confession stirred a mix of relief and sorrow in Ryan, a reminder of how quickly judgment could shift. Colonel Barrett had left him with a card offering a recommendation for officer candidate school if Ryan ever considered a military path. But that offer wasn't what stayed with him. It was Sergeant Walsh's parting words, spoken softly as she gripped his hand. You reminded me that humanity still exists in the smallest moments. My son and I'll carry that with us always. Her son, still at her side, had looked up at Ryan with a shy smile, and for the first time, Ryan felt the true impact of his choice. The story didn't end there. If you believe courage can wear a blue vest as proudly as a uniform, no matter how humble, type respect. Ryan, unsettled by the sudden fame, turned down every interview from local news outlets. He never sought the spotlight, and the attention left him feeling raw. But he couldn't refuse an invitation to speak to Mrs. Hernandez's third-grade class at Fayetteville Elementary. Standing before the children's eager faces, he realized this wasn't about him. It was about the ripple of kindness that could spread from one small act, no matter how ordinary it seemed. Ryan perched awkwardly on a tiny chair, his long legs folded like a grasshopper's, surrounded by a sea of curious 8-year-olds whose unblinking eyes studied him with a mix of awe and confusion. The classroom smelled faintly of crayons and glue, and the hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He tugged at the collar of his shirt, feeling a nervous flutter in his chest, far more intense than the butterflies he'd felt standing stiffly at the military ceremony months ago, where crisp uniforms and polished medals had filled the room with an air of formality. Here, though, the scrutiny came from children, their questions sharp and unfiltered, slicing through the haze of his thoughts. A boy with a fresh crew cut leaned forward, his elbows propped on the desk, and asked in a voice brimming with curiosity, "Did you know she was a soldier?" Ryan paused, his mind drifting back to that chaotic moment at the register. He shook his head, a small, honest gesture. "I didn't know a thing about her," he admitted, his voice soft but steady. "All I saw was a mom standing there trying to do right by her kid. That's all that mattered." His words hung in the air, and he felt a pang of vulnerability, as if he'd just laid bare a piece of his heart to these pint-sized interrogators. A girl in the front row, her pigtails bouncing as she tilted her head, raised her hand and asked, "Were you scared to help her when everyone else was so mad?" The question hit Ryan like a gust of wind, stirring up the memory of that day, the impatient sighs, the glares from the line of customers, the weight of judgment pressing down on the woman in front of him. He leaned back slightly, his brow furrowing as he considered her words. Scared? No, not really, he said, his voice thoughtful, almost as if he were discovering the answer himself. But I was sad, sad that it even had to happen. No one should feel small for trying to take care of their family. No one should have to stand there feeling like the world's against them just for buying groceries. His gaze drifted to the window where sunlight spilled across the playground outside, and he wondered, not for the first time, why kindness sometimes felt like the hardest choice. The following week, the corporate world stirred in response to Ryan's quiet act. Representatives from Walmart's headquarters descended on the store, their polished shoes clicking against the linoleum as they met with management behind closed doors. Ryan watched from his register, half expecting nothing to come of it, but what emerged was something extraordinary. A company-wide initiative dubbed Ryan's Code. It was a discretionary fund, a small pool of money at every register, entrusted to cashiers to help those in genuine need. No forms, no explanations, just trust. The news spread like wildfire, making headlines across the country, and soon other retailers followed suit, launching their own versions of the program. Ryan felt a quiet pride, not for the recognition, but for the ripple effect. A reminder that one small choice could reshape the world in ways he'd never imagined. Meanwhile, Sergeant Walsh, the soldier whose struggle had sparked it all, returned to active duty after her bereavement leave. The weight of her loss still lingered, a heavy shadow she carried as she prepared for deployment. But before she left, she sat down with a pen and paper, her heart full of gratitude, and wrote a letter to Ryan. Her words were simple but piercing. We soldiers are trained to act under pressure, to face fire without flinching. But what you did, your everyday kindness in a world that doesn't always reward it, that's something I learned from a 19-year-old cashier. My son looks up to you now. He says he wants to be like Mr. Ryan when he grows up, and I told him that's a worthy goal. When Ryan received the letter, he read it alone in his room, the words blurring as his eyes welled up. He slipped it into his economics textbook, its edges worn from use, and it became his bookmark, a quiet, constant reminder of what mattered most. No medal, no news segment, no applause at the military ceremony had ever touched him as deeply as those handwritten lines. When his college professors noticed a shift in Ryan's ambitions, from the sleek world of finance to the quieter path of public service, they pressed him for answers. What had changed? He never mentioned the viral video that had briefly lit up social media or the formal recognition at the ceremony. Instead, he offered a simple truth, his voice steady but warm. I learned that the most important transactions in life aren't about money. They're about seeing someone, really seeing them, and doing what you can to help. His professors nodded, but Ryan could tell they didn't fully grasp the weight of his words. To them, it was an answer. To him, it was a revelation. 6 months later, Ryan was still at his register 3 days a week, scanning items under the store's harsh fluorescent lights. On his blue vest, he now wore a small American flag pin, a gift from Sergeant Walsh before her deployment. It wasn't flashy, but it felt like a badge of honor, a quiet nod to a soldier who had taught him that courage wasn't always loud or uniformed. He thought often of her words and of the customers who passed through his line, each one a person, each one carrying their own unseen burdens. Ryan didn't dwell on his actions or analyze them under a microscope. To him, it had been simple, a moment, a choice, a human being in need. He hadn't set out to change the world, but in that fleeting instant at the register, with a line of impatient shoppers and a mother's quiet struggle, he'd done what felt right. Sometimes he realized the bravest acts weren't the ones that earned medals or headlines. They happened at the smallest crossroads, a grocery line, a fleeting glance, a hand extended when no one else would. And sometimes what silenced a community wasn't shame or regret, but a kindness so pure it spoke louder than words ever could.